Alright, how's it going, guys? So there's always been a lot of talk within the community, and I think people generally have a grasp on kind of the bare bones ideas of different archetypes and different playstyles. But I feel like there's a pretty large gap in kind of the overall accepted information for this. So sure, people can agree that Jackie's what you would call an offensive character. Characters who scale, excuse me, fairly well into late game are, what you call, I guess, late game characters. And to an extent, people have kind of a condescending grasp on what's coined as the cockroach playstyle. But other than these very basic analytics, I feel like as a whole, the separation of playstyles goes unnoticed and, in my opinion, very underappreciated for the most part. So I wanted to make a video, and this one's been a long time coming. I've been talking about it a lot. I've said it in comments a lot, and I've been kind of hyping it up, I guess. So it's been a very long time coming, and I just want to talk about what I like to call the offensive spectrum. And I guess it's an opinion thing, but I think it's very important to kind of realize the distinctions between playstyles and to recognize what archetype you're using in-game so you can kind of capitalize on the nuances that each different playstyle has. Now, as always, I've got to give a brief disclaimer here that the examples I give for each different playstyle are not set-in-stone options for a character. I really touched on this in my last video on Jenny, where I talked about characters that have multiple options, and I really tried to highlight the importance of versatility and the ability to transition playstyles. So not all characters can transition playstyles as effectively as other characters, but theoretically, you can play any character using any playstyle. Theoretically, right? Again, I personally think some characters will not be as effective in certain playstyles. I wouldn't want to start cockroaching, as kind of like I said, it's been coined with a Jackie or something like that. But the point I'm really trying to drive home here is that the playstyle is determined by how you play as a player. So sure, playstyles can be supported by abilities and by stats, but at the end of the day, it's how you use the character that defines the playstyle. And that's really what that's really why I'm trying to make this video here, so that you can kind of analyze how you play as a player, and identify with a character that can suit that playstyle. But that's enough of all that. Once again, I'm rambling my introduction, so I hope you'll forgive me for that. Let's kind of jump right into the meat of the video right here. So I want you to picture what I call like I said, the offensive spectrum as kind of a line, as a straight line. And if you look at each ends of the line, the left and the right, you can kind of describe these limits as what I like to call constructive play and destructive play. And this was actually explained to me a very long time ago for a completely different game, for a card game actually, but I find that the logic still applies. So if you're playing constructively, you're looking to build something, you're looking to create something, you're trying to kind of forge something unique, and you're going to be kind of reacting to other players who try to stop you, but ultimately you have an end game goal in your mind, and you're going to be responding, like I said, to the other players. Ultimately, you have this goal in your mind, and you're going to be working to fulfill that goal. You're going to be working to kind of create something. On the other hand, if you're playing destructively, you're playing not to build something up, but to tear down everything your opponents build. So you're playing where the end game goal isn't to, like I said, make something beautiful or creative, but to bring kind of the world to ashes, if that makes any sense, trying to burn everything down. You're playing where the focus isn't on yourself and preservation, but the focus is on your opponents, how they're playing, how to stop what they're doing. So really, like I said, the big differences here for constructive playstyles have a focus, and the focus is themselves as a player, and destructive playstyles have the focus not on you but on your opponents. Now, I hope that kind of makes a little bit of sense, but the farther left on this kind of spectrum you go, the higher the risk. The farther the right you go, the more focused you become on risk and resource management, as I like to call it. So in general, I find there's three main divisions on the offensive spectrum: offensive play on the left, balanced play in the middle, and conservative play on the far right. And again, most people can at the very least identify, to a very limited extent, I think, when you just kind of glance over it, these three kind of parts. But it's kind of the subdivisions and the subdivisions within these three major blocks that really highlight the difference of playing these play styles at high levels of play. So let's just start off with the far left. So the offensive division obviously starts off with a playstyle that is known, or as I call, hyper offense. And these characters are what you might consider kind of glass cannons. And for these characters, there is very heavy emphasis on follow-up and follow-up damage. So if you want to consider resource management, every time you force your opponent to healing, you're kind of trading damage for recovery items. And generally, the closer you get to the middle of the offensive spectrum, the better that this is for you, because it's gaining you mastery, it's gaining you EXP, and it's giving you kind of health advantage, because if you're making them use more health than you because you're dealing more damage, then you're overall ultimately gaining advantage in kind of the war on the resource war, I suppose. However, as you start moving to the left side of the spectrum, chip damage or trash damage becomes much less important. So what becomes much more important is follow-up. So some really good examples of this I think two of kind of the best examples are Jackie and Nadine. So both these characters really rely on making plays to take advantage of extremely powerful but extremely limited offensive abilities. So Jackie needs to be able to get value with Bloodfest, or else it's going to run out and she's not going to have access to it anymore. Because otherwise, like I said, obviously she has to reactivate. And Nadine is kind of in a similar boat, where in order to get value out of hunting, she has to have the follow-up for it, because she's going to deal this large burst amount of damage. But because her stack is consumed, if she doesn't follow up on that damage, then she's lost kind of the advantage that she's taken all this time to build up. So like I said, these characters prioritize immediate damage, lethal damage, or what I kind of call pseudo-lethal damage. So bear with me here, but what I mean by pseudo-lethal damage is basically putting an opponent into catch-up mode. I've touched on this in several videos before, so I won't get too off-topic here, but basically when you force your opponent to remove focus from playing the game and force them to start healing or doing whatever in order to kind of reach the state that they would have been before they took this large amount of damage, which I call, like I said, pseudo-lethal damage. Oftentimes, because of the nature of how fast-paced and how offensive the game is, that's enough of a push to kind of push them out of the running for first place, which is really, really important for, like I said, glass cannons, who the nature of glass cannon kind of playstyle is snowballing playstyle. So the later the game goes on, the more resources your opponents begin to accrue, the weaker this strategy gets, and the more it really starts to run out of steam. So hyper offense is all about making and capitalizing on opportunities, making plays, and taking risks. Those are all very, very key concepts to this playstyle. Now, the next playstyle I want to talk about is one that people don't really acknowledge a lot of the time. This playstyle is what I call bulky offense. And these are characters that I kind of like to call brawlers. Like I said, I called hyper offense characters kind of glass cannons. I call these characters brawlers. And these characters have a focus not specifically on killing opponents, although obviously that's the point of the game, so to some certain extent you would have to argue that yes, it is partly the focus. But these characters focus on combat. They aren't happy unless they're in the middle of the fight. So they focus on brawling, they focus on keeping up the pressure, keeping up the harassing, and on always building up their mastery. So these characters typically have abilities that excel at keeping them sustained, keeping them in the fight. And I've got a few examples I want to kind of cover. So abilities like Corner Attack, Agony Bearer, or Juwante, I believe, Camilla's ability. These are abilities that really excel in giving you an edge in combat. They aren't raw damage abilities, but they're long-term, long-acting. I mean, you say long, I say long. Long for basically the nature of the game based on how kind of offensive it is. But they're long-term, long-acting abilities that excel in sustaining a prolonged fight and keeping you in the combat. That's the key part of this right here, keeping in the combat. So Hunwoo is a perfect example of this archetype. Like, Jackie is to hyper offense what Hunwoo is to bulky offense. So he excels at just building up mastery continuously. Brawler sustains his aggression, and Dogfight gives him kind of more bang for his buck in being in the combat. And couple that with his capability to scale defensively very well into the late game, and honestly, he's the perfect example for what I'm talking about here. Other notable examples are characters like Fiora. I say Sylvia to an extent because she just loves being in combat, she loves being highly mobile, and Camilo, as I mentioned before. There's a lot of characters that can do this. I think this is one of the most common playstyles that people play, even though people might not realize it, because I think whenever you play, I think people play offensively, like hyper offense, they look at that and they understand that, and then people look at cockroaching and they look at that and they understand that, and then I think when people try to find a midpoint between that, what they kind of fall back on is bulky offense, so they always look to find the opportunities to fight. I think this is one of the most common playstyles, and I think it's a very easy, I say easy, it's a playstyle that you can use with a lot of characters. It's got a lot less drawbacks than hyper offense. But anyways, like I said, Fiora, Sylvia, Camilla, and oftentimes people don't look at these characters as aggressive characters. So they see in the help tab that their characters are strong late game and weak early game. And I think that's a very deceiving kind of outlook for these characters. I mean, I wouldn't particularly disagree, but I think it's very, very deceiving. So these characters are strong in the late game, but only if they've had a bountiful early game. And their abilities completely support this style of play, playing aggressive, playing offensive in the early game, but not like it's not so aggressive as hyper offense. Like, it's a spectrum, as I said before. So a brawler wouldn't put themselves at risk, like I said, to the same extent as glass cannon, because glass cannons need that immediate damage. Brawlers aren't thirsty for damage. They're thirsty for mastery, they're thirsty for XP, they're thirsty for levels. You don't have follow-up? Who cares? That's just another punching bag left alive for you to keep building mastery off of. The biggest thing for this archetype is the focus on sustaining your aggression over a long period of time, because like I said, these characters start being really, really scary in the late game. So sustaining this aggression over a long period of time. This comes down to keeping yourself healthy and not overcommitting to your aggression. So like I said, resource management is a pretty key thing as well as risk management to an extent. Obviously, you're going to be managing your risks, managing your resources, and you're going to be saying, okay, I always want to be in the fight, so I always want to have the resources available to keep me in the fight. If you're stopping fighting to have to go out of your way to do something, then that's not good for this as a playstyle. So after that, we're starting to get into the balanced part of the spectrum, and this is where people start to get confused, I find at least. So a lot of times, when I say something about a playstyle that is more item-oriented or build-focused, people take that to mean I'm saying mastery isn't important. And at this part of the spectrum, mastery is still 100% an important factor. So balance doesn't even come close to equating to what people consider as cockroaching. And because a lot of times people don't know where to draw the line, I find they play balanced characters either way too aggressively or way too passively. Offensive characters generally build items based off where the fight is happening. A character like Jackie might rush a weapon, obviously, and then just pick up whatever armor she happens to come across via drops or kills. A character like Han Wu or Sylvia will have more of a focus on the armor, but they won't really go too far out of the way of their weapon, rather, or out of the way of the fight to focus on that armor. If they're in an area with armor pieces and weapon pieces, oftentimes when they find the weapon piece from that area, they'll just move on, whether they have or whether they don't have the armor that they could have gotten from that area, and they'll just get it as they go. And obviously, this goes without saying, but I have to say it, or I'm afraid people will accuse me of recommending, like, no armor Han Wu or something crazy like that. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. Bulky offense, it has it in its name. It's a blend of bulk and it's a blend of offense, typically leaning more towards the offense part of that. With a balanced playstyle, the big thing right here is that the focus becomes much more spread out. You'll give priority to building up all aspects of your character. So weapons, armor, food, stamina, and mastery. I have to mention that as well, and mastery. So you do this without putting yourself at unnecessary risk, because you can scale it into the benefits you miss by playing more passively. So some good examples of characters that can excel in this style of play, in my humble opinion, of course, are Leon, Rogelio, William, Kathy, Bernice. The biggest thing that a lot of these characters share is two things. So first of all, they all scale extremely well, both defensively and offensively, or they either get such a boost in one area that even though they have kind of a poor scale in the other area, it kind of evens out. I mean, I don't want to get into any arguments about these characters right here. These are just kind of off the top of my head ideas, characters that kind of come to my mind when I think balanced. So I know some people like to point at Leon's max stats for some reason. So I don't want to get into any arguments about that. I'm just going to say these are my opinions right here. Anyways, moving on from there, the second thing they kind of share is the majority of these characters have survivability tools. And some of these tools you might not expect to be survivability tools. So I'll go over some of the obvious ones right there, obviously. So rapacious collecting, obviously, that's going to be giving you item advantage. Speedy recovery, inning eater, these abilities make it easier to sustain your character, obviously, so it makes it, a lot more survivability in that sense. But offensive-ish abilities like leg shot and arteriometry, I guess old arteriometry, like I'm pretty sure like new arter. I haven't tried new Kathy, but from what I understand, new arteriometry is like not very, doesn't deal much damage. But anyways, they're good survivability tools because oftentimes when it's a lot easier for an opponent to just back out when inflicted with these statuses rather than kind of continue a fight. a lot of times, just because I don't know. I mean, obviously you can, but just the disbenefits from these effects are oftentimes enough to just I don't want to say annoy someone away because that sounds as if it's like a gimmicky effect. It's not really a gimmicky effect. Like, they're strong effects, but like I hope you guys get what I'm trying to say. A lot of times it's easier for them to kind of just back out rather than continue to fight. So I guess kind of the biggest distinctions between the left, the right, and the middle is that the left is actively going out of their way to stay in combat. The right is going out of their way to avoid combat. The middle is very much a balance between these two extremes, and often balanced characters can kind of fluctuate along the length of the spectrum to a certain extent, to sort of adapt to the game that they're in, obviously. So a lot of times, if you're playing a balanced character, and you find that you're having trouble with some of the other characters, you can kind of fluctuate to a little bit more of a conservative playstyle. A lot of times, if you're playing a balanced character and you're building your armors, you're building your weapon, you notice, holy shit, I'm in the lead very easily right now. Well, you can very easily pick up a more offensive role while you're doing that. It's very, very easy to kind of fluctuate along the line. I wouldn't say fluctuate far enough to go from being balanced to being bulky offense, or from being balanced to what is kind of the equivalent in the other direction, which I'm going to be going over. But like I said, the divisions, there's kind of two in it, and balance is just kind of one large section. So that's because there's a lot more flexibility, a lot more kind of room to fluctuate along this line for this kind of playstyle. Speaking of the right, I'll move on to what I call semi-conservative as a playstyle. And this is what most people mistake to be cockroaching. Much like balance, I think a lot of people mistake balance to be cockroaching as well. But I mentioned kind of a name for all the characters in each archetype, so glass cannons, brawlers, etc. So what I would call these characters are cautious, or more, I guess, more specifically, opportunity seekers might be a good way to put it. So these players avoid risks pretty much at all costs. That's the main thing for this playstyle. They avoid risks at all costs. This doesn't mean they won't take a fight when they have the opportunity to take a fight. And like I was mentioning about opportunity, these characters are generally going to be looking to an extent. They're not going to be putting themselves at risk for this extent, but they're going to be looking for that game-changing moment when they can take an opportunity to punish an opponent. So if you think about a character like Jenny, and whenever I say Jenny, until they buff Jenny, which, I mean, they should buff Jenny, but until they buff Jenny, just assume I'm talking about old Jenny, because we don't talk about new Jenny, okay? So talking about old Jenny here, right? She can play a very semi-conservative playstyle right here, and she always has that option for revenge play. If she sees an opponent who's very, very strong, very, very ahead, and they put themselves in a position where they can get screwed over by revenge play, then you take that opportunity and you take the lead. And a lot of characters can kind of do this to a certain extent. But going back to the idea that they'll take a fight when they can, if they have the opportunity to take a fight and they have the resources to expend to take that fight. Typically, dealing small amounts of damage generally incentivizes both parties to keep a fight going, and this is actually pretty important. So this ends up that you're able to grow a fair amount of mastery while committing to building resources, and that's pretty big, because the difference being from your opponent, which, like we said, you're going with this long sustained fight where you're each dealing kind of a small amount of damage, is you're looking to win the resource war right here. So you're going to have a lot of defense. They might have less defense than you, but more offense in terms of weapons and stuff. And you can easily trade with a character like this in terms of damage, because you have put a lot more commitment into resources, into recovery items. Is basically one of the biggest things when I say resources. So you're looking to win that resource fight between your opponents. You'll be dealing poor amounts of damage, but at the same time, you'll be kind of sustaining through a lot of the damage that they lay onto you. However, like I said, you'll have much more resources, and you'll be looking to kind of run them out of resources before they run you out. But like I said, you're not putting yourself at risk, so if you're going to use all your resources in a fight, obviously you're going to acknowledge that before it happens, and you're going to not take that risk. So it's all about risk management. Very, very focused on risk management and resource management, obviously. So typically, like I said, this is a playstyle where you very much avoid any risk. And as this is a playstyle where you're avoiding risk, you'll still end up with kind of the same end result in many games as you would cockroaching. And the reason for this, of course, is low risk often yields low reward. That's just kind of in the nature of the playstyle. So many games, your resources will sustain you very, very easily into top 5, but you'll be finishing in first place much less than you can expect in a balanced playstyle might allow you to do. And on that note, let's move on to kind of the final playstyle. Obviously, as we the previous one being semi-conservative kind of alludes into the name, just conservative or cockroaching for people who want to take that as slang as well. Whereas the motto of the last archetype is avoid risk, playing straight up conservative takes that to an entirely different level. So it's taken to the point where the mantra of conservative playstyle is avoid combat altogether. Now, I mentioned previously, semi-conservative finishes in top 5 very, very easily, but rarely finishes in first. When you cockroach, you will finish almost always in second place, but essentially you'll never finish in first. If you finish in first when you're playing a defensive playstyle, typically that means you've transitioned or you've been playing all along a semi-conservative playstyle and you found yourself an opportunity to capitalize on. Cockroaches are typically so far behind offensively that punishing an out of position opponent or capitalizing on an opportunity, these are nearly impossible to do for characters who are completely playing on the very, very far right or cockroaching. So first place, it lends to the player often who risked more and gained more. A lot of games like that. But second place will almost always be determined by the best cockroach in the game. Very few players in non just raw conservative playstyles have the ability to stop cockroaches. And if you're playing anything to the left of a cockroach, you'll pretty much always finish in either first or in third. And the reason is you've been expending resources throughout the game to kind of sustain an aggression, sustain playing offensive to a certain extent, right? Because like I said, anything left of cockroaching is more offensive than cockroaching because as you move to the left, you're getting more offensive. As you move to the right, you're getting more conservative. So you'll have been more offensive to a certain extent, and any aggression, any offensive kind of capabilities that you uphold in a game, it takes resources to uphold that. It takes resources to sustain that. So for a character who has any amount of aggression more than a cockroach, you'll have been expending more resources that game than the cockroach will, because the cockroach is all about hoarding resources, building up yourself a buffer so that you're never going to be put in these situations where you're starting to run out of resources. Obviously, games can happen where you get really, really bad luck, and you just keep getting hit. But I mean, that to an extent comes down to map awareness. If you're going to be healing, if you're going to be moving to areas that are going to be high traffic at different parts of the game, I'm probably going to do a video about this as well. Kind of traffic in different areas, when they're of higher traffic, when they're of lower traffic, when it's safe to go here, when it's not safe, some stuff like that. But anyways, so like I said, that kind of comes down to map awareness. But to an extent, you can get really, really bad luck as a cockroach and um, finish third, maybe third, I guess, or maybe I don't know, maybe fourth. But in general, because you have this kind of buffer of resources, you're always going to have an edge in the resource war over any other character. So second place will typically always be the best cockroach in the game. Third place will generally be the second best or the more lucky of the two highest offensive characters. Not highest, two like I guess the two leading offensive characters. And fourth place is kind of up in the air, right? Fourth place, you can have the second best cockroach. That happens sometimes. Fourth place, you can have just more offensive characters, more balanced characters. You don't usually see that many, like, you don't usually see, like, a lot of cockroaching players in the same game, and that kind of lead for one reason. That's not one reason. Like, I mean, like one of the reasons is like a lot of people find it like a boring playstyle, I guess. So that's kind of, I guess, why you don't see it as much. It's much less rewarding, obviously. But yeah, that's kind of a break. I mean, that's kind of a breakdown on like this is pretty much everything I want to say. So that's kind of a breakdown of all kind of the different play styles. I think it's very important to analyze the different play styles. I think it's very important to analyze how you play as a player and kind of pick a character that fits your playstyle. Like you said, I gave kind of examples for stuff. You can make it you can kind of make a case for a lot of characters being a lot of different playstyles. But I find you should identify your playstyle and kind of identify a character that can support that playstyle. I find I don't know, just I guess food for thought, things to think of. Anyways, I don't really have an outro planned for this. But anyways, yeah, that's everything I had to say for here. Let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like because that lets me know whether people actually like enjoy this type of content, this kind of explaining things content. Because I never really know whether people like the guide type contents, like the gameplay type content, like the because like this right here is probably a lot closer to my general guide because it's not just raw gameplay in the background of me ranting. I mean, it is me ranting, but like I'm gonna have kind of visual aids, I think, to a certain extent. I haven't made the visual part of it, but I have a kind of plan in mind for where I want to take that. So I never really know kind of which of the kind of different videos people prefer. So yeah, anyways, that's my big rant on just let me know if you liked the video, leave a like, leave a comment, tell me if you liked it or if you didn't. And hopefully I'll see you next time. I've got the Adriana guide in the making. It's been in the making for a while, meaning should probably get a bit more work done on it. I don't really have very much onto it. I have gameplay for it, I guess. So that's coming out soon. I've got another general guide coming out soon as well. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys next time.